Accra, the capital city of Ghana, was a vibrant sprawl of life and contradiction. Bustling markets with colorful fabrics and the sweet scent of roasted plantains sat beside towering office buildings and dusty alleyways. It was in one of these alleys, tucked between a crumbling concrete shop and a rusting gate, that Gloria Addo lived with her mother. Their home was a single room with cracked walls, shared between dreams too big and space too small. Gloria, a bright-eyed 17-year-old, had just completed her secondary school education in 2017 and had begun dreaming bigger than the limitations of her environment. Her grades were good, her heart full of hope, and her mind restless with ambition. She often watched planes arc through the sky above Macaulay Market and imagined herself on one, flying toward a life where poverty was a memory and success was a reality. She wasn't like the other girls on the block who were content with just finding a husband. No, Gloria wanted more. She wanted to work, to build, to conquer something beyond Accra's borders. But opportunity, in her world, was as scarce as rain in the Harmattan season. That was until she met Christopher Thompson. Christopher Thompson was a man of presence. Not overly tall, but broad-shouldered with a crisp white shirt always tucked neatly into his trousers and a smile that glinted like a promise. He spoke with confidence and had the kind of tone that made people want to believe him. He said he worked with an international employment agency that helped place Ghanaians in jobs overseas. He frequented local churches, community centers, and schools, always looking for bright young girls who wanted to make a difference for their families. He'd tell them stories of Ghanaian girls working in Dubai, earning dollars, while their parents back home built houses and sent their siblings to university. Gloria first saw him when he gave a talk at her church, Redemption Power Ministries. He spoke of Dubai like it was Eden, air-conditioned supermarkets, generous bosses, and weekends off to shop or call family. Gloria's heart fluttered as he described the life she'd only seen on Instagram and TV. After the sermon, she approached him with cautious hope. She told him she had just finished school, that her mother was a widow, and that she was ready to work. Thompson's eyes lit up with interest, as if he'd found exactly what he was looking for. The following week, Gloria sat across from Thompson at a small cafe on the edge of OSU. Her hands trembled as she held a notebook, ready to jot down every word. Thompson brought out glossy pamphlets with images of young African women smiling in clean, bright supermarkets. He explained the process in detail: visa applications, travel arrangements, and accommodation. Everything is handled, he assured her, but we need a small processing fee to show you're serious. The amount, though steep, seemed manageable with some help from her mother and contributions from her aunt. It all sounded legitimate. There was even a printed contract with the agency logo and signature spaces. Gloria hesitated only for a moment before deciding. She couldn't let fear trap her in Accra. The next morning, she and her mother visited the bank to withdraw the money. Thompson gave them a receipt, complete with a seal. Gloria didn't sleep that night. Her heart raced with a strange mixture of joy and unease, but she chalked it up to nerves. She had no idea that this would be the first step into a nightmare that would reshape her soul. Thompson wasn't just offering this opportunity to Gloria. As the days passed, Gloria discovered there were other girls just like her, around 35 in total, who had signed up through Thompson. They came from different parts of Ghana, Kumasi, Tamale, Takoradi, and all of them believed they were headed to Dubai. Thompson organized a group meeting one Saturday at a hotel conference room in East Legon. The girls were told to bring their passports and be ready for orientation. Gloria arrived early, dressed in her finest skirt and blouse, her hair braided with red and gold beads. The room buzzed with excitement and nervous laughter. Some girls swapped numbers, already imagining a sisterhood that would flourish abroad. Thompson stood at the front, flanked by two stern-looking men in suits. "You're all about to begin a new chapter in life," he announced, "and I promise you will thank yourselves for this decision." There were cheers and claps,
and for a moment Gloria allowed herself to believe she was part of something magical.
No one noticed the way the suited men never smiled, or how they carefully watched each girl with eyes like hawks. The travel date came quicker than expected. They were told to pack lightly, just essentials. The flight, they were told, would land in Dubai, and from there they would be escorted to their housing and job placements. Gloria hugged her mother tightly at Kotoka International Airport, fighting back tears as the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. "Be strong," her mother whispered. "God is with you." Gloria smiled, hiding the lump in her throat. She waved goodbye and walked toward the gates, her heart full of dreams. Beside her, the other girls whispered excitedly. Once on the plane, Gloria sat by the window, staring out as Accra grew smaller beneath her. Hours later, when they landed, it was not Dubai's sparkling skyline that greeted them, but the harsh, searing sun of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Confusion turned to panic as Arabic-speaking guards directed them into separate buses. Thompson was nowhere in sight. The air was thick with the unspoken fear, the realization that something had gone terribly wrong. Gloria clutched her passport and prayed, but the nightmare had only just begun. The bus was old and rusted, its interior dimly lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs that cast eerie shadows across the anxious faces of the girls. Gloria sat sandwiched between two strangers, girls she had only briefly greeted at the airport. Their faces now bore the same growing fear. The air conditioning barely worked, and the desert heat felt like a smothering blanket. Arabic music played faintly from a crackling speaker, an unsettling contrast to the silence among the girls. No one knew what to say. They had been told Dubai, not Saudi Arabia. Gloria thought it might be a stopover, perhaps a miscommunication. But the armed guards flanking the bus and the cold expressions on the men outside suggested otherwise. As the bus rumbled deeper into the city, the tall skyscrapers faded into modest buildings and eventually into distant compounds surrounded by high walls and guarded gates. The bus stopped at an iron gate where two women in long black abayas waited. One of the men opened the door and barked orders. A guard pointed to Gloria. "You, come." Her legs trembled as she stood. One of the other girls grabbed her hand briefly, eyes wide with silent pleading. Gloria stepped out, feeling the dry wind sting her face. As the door shut behind her and the bus pulled away, her heart sank. She was completely alone. The house Gloria was led into sat at the end of a quiet street, lined with thorny bushes and cracked pavement. The woman who greeted her looked to be in her 50s, with severe eyes and no trace of a smile. Her name was Fatima. She spoke little English, but knew enough to make her expectations clear. Gloria was to clean, cook, wash, and tend to her 4 children, each of them disabled and unable to walk or feed themselves. The house, while spacious, felt more like a prison. The windows had thick curtains that never opened, and the doors were reinforced with bolts on the outside. Gloria's room was a small storage space with a mattress on the floor and a single flickering light bulb. That first night, she cried into her pillow, overwhelmed with confusion and grief. She thought of her mother and the lie she had unknowingly sold her daughter into. There were no supermarkets, no schedules, no pay, only work, endless, grueling work. The children screamed often, needed bathing, feeding, lifting, changing. The tasks were relentless. Fatima didn't speak much, but when she did, her words cut sharp like knives. No rest, you work, or no food. Gloria knew then she was not an employee. She was a slave. Days turned into weeks, and Gloria lost count of time. Her body ached from the physical strain, and her spirit frayed from the emotional toll. Fatima never allowed her to leave the house, not even to step outside for air. There were no phones, no internet, no way to communicate with anyone from the outside world. Every day began before sunrise and ended long after midnight. She was allowed only 2 meals a day, barely enough to sustain her through the rigorous labor. She washed clothes by hand, cooked massive meals, changed adult diapers, and cleaned vomit without complaint, fearing what would happen if she resisted. The children were unpredictable, sometimes pulling her hair or biting her as she tried to help them. Fatima watched with a constant sneer, berating Gloria in Arabic, calling her names she didn't understand but felt deeply. Nonetheless, the isolation was maddening. Some nights, Gloria would sit alone in her tiny room, whispering to herself, pretending she was back in Accra, sitting under the mango tree with her mother. But every morning the fantasy shattered and the nightmare resumed. She began to wonder, was anyone looking for her? Did her mother know she was not in Dubai? Or worse, had Thompson lied to everyone? After a month, something in Gloria broke. It wasn't a dramatic snap, but a slow, creeping numbness that took root in her chest. She stopped crying. Tears required energy, and she no longer had the luxury. But she did have one last ember of hope: escape. One morning, just before dawn, she noticed that Fatima had forgotten to bolt the front door. Her heart pounded violently against her ribs as she quietly slipped on a pair of slippers and crept toward the door. The house was silent. Even the children slept soundly. She opened the door slowly, trying not to let the hinges creak. The desert wind hit her face like a slap, but she didn't stop. She ran, barefoot, aimless, through the streets of Safa. The city was unfamiliar and vast, and she had no idea where to go. She ducked behind cars, scanned for any sign of police or embassy buildings, but none came. She didn't get far. A patrolling squad car saw her and within minutes stopped her escape. The officers yelled in Arabic, cuffed her hands, and threw her into the back of the van. She tried to plead, to explain, but they didn't listen. They already knew where she belonged. Hours later, she was back at Fatima's doorstep, bruised, silent, and defeated. Fatima's expression was a mask of fury. That night, the drugs began. They didn't explain what they were giving her, but the effects were immediate. A pill crushed into her food one night left her drowsy, disoriented, and unable to stand. Another dose made her sleep for 3 days straight. When she awoke, she found herself tied to her mattress, wrists bruised, throat dry from dehydration. She screamed for help, but no one came. Fatima would occasionally open the door, drop a plate of plain rice on the floor, and leave without a word. Gloria was only allowed out of the room when Fatima needed help with the children. They would untie her, force her to do the chores, then return her to her prison and bind her again. Her body began to shrink from malnutrition, and her mind spiraled into darkness. Hallucinations started. She saw her mother calling from the window, Thompson's face floating in the mirror, voices whispering in languages she didn't know. She began to wonder if she was dying. She wanted to die. But something deep within her, something ancient and fierce, refused to let go. In her dreams, she began to see something else. A version of herself standing in shadows, eyes burning red with rage, whispering, "We will make them pay." The hallucinations worsened with time, merging seamlessly into her waking hours. Gloria couldn't always tell when she was dreaming or conscious. In the pitch-black isolation of her room, bound by ropes that bit into her skin, her mind became both her tormentor and sanctuary. She started hearing voices that sounded eerily like her mother's, whispering prayers in Twi and singing lullabies from her childhood. Shadows danced on the ceiling, sometimes forming shapes, Thompson's face sneering at her or Fatima's eyes glowing like coals. One night, she thought she saw a little girl in the corner of her room, silent, barefoot, and crying blood. Gloria shut her eyes, but the image wouldn't leave. The lack of food, sleep, and the effects of the mysterious drugs left her teetering between life and death. One afternoon, when the door creaked open and Fatima dragged her out to clean, Gloria collapsed halfway through scrubbing the bathroom tiles. She woke up later in her room, tied down again, her wrists swollen and raw. A single piece of bread sat on a plate by the door. Hunger gnawed at her like a demon. She crawled to it, ate without chewing, and returned to the mattress, whispering again to the voice in her head, "Please, please let me go." But the voice only whispered back, "Not yet, not like this." One morning, though Gloria could barely tell time anymore, Fatima was gone. The house was silent and there were no children crying, no commands being shouted. Gloria woke up unbound, confused. For hours she sat waiting for someone to come in. No one did. She tiptoed out of her room, dizzy but determined. The living room was empty. The front door was locked, but one of the windows in the kitchen was cracked open. It was small, barely big enough to squeeze through, but she didn't hesitate. She pushed a stool under it, climbed up, and slid through, scraping her hip and shoulder on the way out. She landed hard in the dusty yard behind the house. Her legs were weak and her vision spun, but she got up and ran again, this time not looking back. She made it 3 blocks before collapsing near a small bakery. A man saw her fall and ran over, speaking in Arabic. Gloria begged in English, "Help me, please. Police, embassy, Ghana." The man looked confused but kind. He helped her sit up, gave her water, and called someone. Minutes later, a police car arrived. Not the embassy, not salvation. Gloria screamed and tried to run, but her body gave out. The officers grabbed her, cuffed her again, and tossed her into the back seat. Her world spun into darkness once more. This time, they didn't return her to Fatima. They took her to a local jail, cold, metallic, and reeking of filth. Gloria was shoved into a cramped cell with other women, all African, all silent. Some were missing teeth, others had scars that looked like burns or whip marks. They didn't speak, they just stared. Gloria counted over 30 women in that single room, and from the muffled cries and sounds echoing down the halls, she guessed there were many more cells like it. She sat in a corner, rocking herself slowly, trying to breathe through the stench of urine and despair. Days passed, or weeks, time had become meaningless. She learned that most of the women had been trafficked, like her, promised jobs in Dubai and sold into servitude. Some had been here for years. A woman named Amina from Nigeria told her that over 5,000 African women were imprisoned in similar facilities across Saudi Arabia, many never to be released. "No one cares," Amina whispered one night. "You're just a body to them, a tool. Once you're broken, they throw you away." Gloria didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her eyes, hollow and burning, said it all. Her hope was dying, but something darker was growing in its place. Then, as suddenly as she was brought in, Gloria was pulled out. A man from a different agency came for her. He handed papers to the guards, and without explanation, she was released into his custody. Gloria didn't know whether to feel relieved or afraid. Her heart said the latter. The man said nothing during the drive, just played loud music and glanced at her through the rearview mirror. They arrived at a large beige house on the outskirts of a city she didn't recognize. This house was worse than the last. No disabled children this time. Instead, 7 grown sons, all tall, all broad-shouldered, and all wearing the same look of entitlement and malice. The mother greeted Gloria with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Work," she said, pointing around the house. "Clean, cook, no outside, no phone." Gloria nodded slowly, her lips dry, her heart in free fall. That night, as the sun set, she was given a room with a broken lock. She didn't sleep. She knew something was coming. Around midnight, she heard the footsteps, 7 of them. The doorknob turned. The door creaked open. She didn't scream. She just whispered, "God, help me." But God was silent. What happened that night was beyond nightmare. They came in laughing, their footsteps heavy, their voices eager and cruel. One by one, they dragged her from the bed, tied her arms with a belt, and held her down. She fought, but they were too strong. Her screams were muffled by pillows, her pleas drowned beneath their guttural breaths. When the first one was done, the next took his place. Then the next, then the next. 7 sons, each one carving a piece of her soul away. When they left, her body was a bruised shell, bleeding and broken. She lay on the floor until morning, unable to move. The mother brought her a bowl of water and said, "You clean now. No rest. Men are men. You must accept." Gloria stared at her with hollow eyes, no longer crying. Something inside her had shifted. A seed had been planted in the blood and trauma. Not fear, not despair, vengeance. She would never be the same again. Her body might remain caged, but her soul had begun to wake, and it would never sleep again. The days that followed blurred into a sickening cycle of agony and silence. Gloria worked during the day, her limbs bruised, her ribs sore from where they'd kicked her, and her face swollen from where she'd been slapped for speaking back. Every night, it happened again. Sometimes just one of them, sometimes all. And always, she was alone. The house was big but felt like a coffin, every room suffocating with the stench of control and filth. They never took her to a hospital, no matter how much she bled. They didn't care. To them, she was just flesh, a vessel to be used. But even as her body failed her, Gloria's mind began to focus. Not on freedom, not on escape, but on every name, every face, every scar they left. She memorized the layout of the house, counted every door, every hallway, every lock. She listened to how they laughed when they thought she wasn't around, how they argued with each other, how they sometimes drank too much and left keys on the kitchen counter. Her suffering had transformed into strategy. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was preparing. For what? She didn't yet know. But something inside her, something ancient and furious, was stirring. A voice that whispered from the shadows of her soul, "You are not broken. You are becoming." One afternoon, Gloria collapsed in the kitchen. The heat, the hunger, the trauma, it had finally overwhelmed her. Her head hit the tile with a crack, and for a moment she thought she died. But instead of blackness, she saw something else. An old woman, glowing, barefoot, with cold dark skin and eyes like burning coals. She stood in the kitchen doorway, not speaking, only watching. Gloria blinked, certain it was a hallucination, another side effect of the drugs. But the woman didn't vanish. She stepped closer, leaned down, and pressed her hand against Gloria's forehead. In that touch, Gloria felt everything. Rage, grief, power. Her pain wasn't hers alone anymore. It was ancient, shared by generations of women who had been silenced, beaten, discarded. She felt the wails of those long buried, the screams that never found ears, the vengeance left unclaimed. And then, just like that, the woman disappeared. Gloria lay there, trembling, her eyes wide. When the mother of the house came in minutes later and kicked her to get up, something shifted in the air. The room went cold. The woman recoiled. Gloria stood slowly, blood dripping from her mouth, and whispered a single word that didn't sound like any language the old woman had taught her. The mother backed away, suddenly pale. Something was changing. That night, none of the 7 sons entered her room. Gloria waited, listening to the house, the quiet arguments, the unease in their footsteps. She heard them mention something about her eyes. "Did you see them?" one whispered. "They weren't normal." Another replied she was chanting something. It didn't sound human. For the first time since she had entered that house, they were afraid. And that fear fed Gloria. The pain was still there, and so was the hunger, the exhaustion, the nausea. But something new pulsed through her veins. Power. A connection to something primal and unforgiving. The next morning, she rose without being called. She cleaned the house, humming an old lullaby from her childhood. But the words weren't quite right. They twisted and curled like smoke. When she passed the sons in the hall, they stepped aside, avoiding her eyes. At lunch, one of them refused to eat the food she had prepared, muttering something about feeling cursed. That evening, one of the sons fell down the stairs. Another had a seizure while watching television. Gloria said nothing. She simply watched. And when the mother looked at her and asked, "What have you done?" Gloria smiled faintly, lips cracked and bleeding, and replied, "Nothing yet." Over the next week, the household descended into chaos. The youngest son began screaming at night, waking the others with tales of a woman standing at the foot of his bed, eyes bleeding, mouth wide open. Another one claimed his phone kept dialing a number on its own, his own number. They started fighting among themselves, accusing each other of bringing a cursed girl into their home. Their mother called the agency that had brought Gloria, demanding they take her back, but they didn't answer. Gloria, meanwhile, moved like a ghost through the house, silent, obedient, eyes hollow and watching. She barely ate, yet her strength seemed to return. Her bruises faded faster than they should have. When one of the sons tried to confront her, screaming and raising his hand to slap her, he suddenly froze. his hand trembling violently before he collapsed to the ground, eyes rolled back. He spent the next 3 days mumbling in tongues, clawing at the walls of his room. The father, who had once ignored her completely, now refused to be in the same room with her. "She's not a girl," he muttered. "She's something else." Gloria never corrected him. For the first time in years, they were right. But vengeance, Gloria realized, could not simply be served in pain. Not yet. There was still unfinished business. One night as the house slept, some in fear, some under sedation, she found the father's phone on the counter. She unlocked it easily. She had watched him enter the code many times. She called a number she remembered from years ago, before the drugs, before the beatings, her mother's. Miraculously, it rang. Her voice cracked when her mother answered, older now, more weathered, but still. "Ha, Mama," she whispered. And her mother dropped the phone. "Gloria?" she cried. "Is it you?" Gloria couldn't speak. Tears ran down her face, but she couldn't form the words. Her mother sobbed into the phone, begging her to come home to tell her where she was. Gloria could only whisper, "Soon." Then she hung up and threw the phone into the fire. That night, as she lay on the floor of her prison-turned-temple, the old woman from her vision returned. She sat beside Gloria and whispered in her ear, "It begins now." Gloria didn't sleep. She sat upright, eyes open, waiting for morning, waiting for war. The morning after the call, the household awoke to a thick, unnatural fog pressing against the windows. It wasn't the season for it, and it hadn't rained, but visibility outside had dropped to mere meters. Inside, the atmosphere felt heavier, like the air had become liquid, sluggish, and hard to breathe. Gloria stood in the kitchen, cooking breakfast as she always did, but the smells didn't waft through the air like before. Instead, they clung to the walls, rancid and suffocating. When she placed the food on the table, no one touched it. The youngest son, already trembling from days of terror, screamed at the sight of her and ran into the bathroom, locking the door behind him. The mother sat at the edge of the dining room chair, lips pressed tight, fingers twitching uncontrollably. One of the brothers had tried to escape during the night, taking his car and driving into the fog. He hadn't returned. His phone was found on the front steps, burned, melted like it had been in a fire. Gloria watched the remaining sons, her face expressionless, but her eyes sharp. They were unraveling. And still, she hadn't laid a single finger on them. The house was doing the work for her now. The fog stayed for 3 days. The father tried to call the authorities, but the phone lines only played static when they dialed out. Their internet, once fast and stable, flickered like candlelight before going dark completely. The house was sealed in silence. No neighbors, no passing cars, just the steady thrum of fear. Gloria cleaned the same floors she'd once bled on, humming old songs her grandmother used to sing to her during her matin nights in Accra. The tune made the walls vibrate and the lights flicker, though no wind stirred outside. The mother locked herself in her room, scribbling prayers in a notebook, muttering verses aloud as if warding off something demonic. Gloria passed her once in the hallway, and the woman screamed, slamming her door shut and pushing a dresser against it. The brothers began sleeping in the living room, lights on, weapons close, but it made no difference. One night, the eldest woke with claw marks across his chest. Another found all the mirrors in the house smashed, shards arranged in spirals across the floor. Gloria remained silent through it all, bearing witness. Let them feel what I felt, she thought. Let them lose everything they clung to for power. By the 5th night, reality had fully slipped its leash. The house no longer obeyed the laws of physics. Doors opened into wrong rooms. Windows showed landscapes that didn't belong, deserts, swamps, endless fields of screaming mouths. One brother swore he saw the dead grandmother walking down the hall, dragging a coffin behind her. Another said he woke up floating above his bed, unable to scream, watching Gloria standing in the corner, her eyes black as oil. She hadn't moved. She didn't need to. The house had become her. Every scream echoed with her voice. Every nightmare bore her face. But the real Gloria, the flesh and blood girl, sat quietly in the storage room, fingers tracing symbols she didn't remember learning. They came to her in dreams, in the voices of the others, the forgotten girls, the ones who died in silence, their stories erased. They whispered to her at night, guiding her hand as she marked the floors with salt, ash, and blood drawn from her own fingertips. When the seventh night came, she stood in the center of the sigil she had drawn and said the names of every girl she had ever met in captivity. The house groaned in reply. The air shimmered with heat, and then it began. The first to die was the second youngest. He ran toward Gloria with a broken chair leg, shrieking curses, intent on ending her. But the moment he stepped across the threshold of the sigil, his body convulsed. His screams turned to gurgles. Boils erupted across his face. His bones twisted inside his flesh, and within seconds, he collapsed, a steaming, crumpled heap. No one dared move. The silence that followed was thicker than the fog. Gloria didn't look at them. She simply stepped over the corpse and walked to her room. That night, the others didn't sleep. They sat in the living room with weapons, but nothing came. Not yet. In the early hours of the morning, the house grew cold, unnaturally so. Ice formed on the windows. Their breath misted in the air. The mother began to hum to herself, over and over, "This is a curse, this is a curse, this is a curse," until her voice cracked. The fog lifted that day, but they didn't dare leave. Something told them that the horror would follow, that it was within them now, not just the house. Gloria wrote in a stolen notebook, her handwriting neat and calm. They deserve to feel it all, piece by piece, fear by fear, until justice is balanced. The father snapped next. He'd remained the most composed of them all, distant, silent, always watching Gloria with suspicion and disgust. But on the 10th night, he sat alone in the garage with a bottle of whiskey, staring at the photo of his family taken 5 years prior. He whispered to it, tears slipping down his leathery cheeks. "I only wanted obedience. I never meant for this." The lights flickered, and he saw Gloria's reflection in the shattered rearview mirror standing behind him. But when he turned, she wasn't there. Still, her voice echoed in his ears. "Do you feel helpless now?" He dropped the bottle. His screams woke the others, but by the time they got to him, the garage door was wide open and the car engine was running. He'd rammed himself into the far wall, spine crushed, eyes open in frozen terror. They tried to blame Gloria, but she was still in her room, door locked, asleep, or at least appearing to be. The police were finally called again, but this time, the line connected. And what they heard wasn't a human voice. It was Gloria's lullaby, sung slowly, over and over, and behind it, the sound of thousands of footsteps. The line went dead. No call back, no dial tone. The phone turned off on its own, refusing to be revived, as if the device itself had heard the voice and wanted no part in what was coming. The brothers stood in the living room, clutching whatever they could find, knives, chairs, even pieces of broken wood, facing every creaking shadow like it might come alive and rip their eyes from their skulls. The mother had stopped eating. She sat on the couch, rocking slowly, arms wrapped around her knees, muttering prayers in broken Arabic, English, and a language Gloria couldn't name but understood anyway. It was the language of desperation. That night, the power finally went out. The lights flickered 3 times, like a heartbeat stuttering. Then darkness swallowed the house. The emergency generator didn't kick in. Candles were lit, but their flames danced in ways they shouldn't have. They bent backward, away from Gloria's room. The smell of sulfur filled the hallways, and then, at midnight, the front door opened on its own. No wind, no footsteps, just the echo of ancient breath returning home. Gloria stepped out of her room, barefoot, lips moving in a chant as old as blood. Behind her, the shadows followed. She didn't walk, she floated, not above the ground, not like a ghost, but as if gravity itself no longer applied to her. The floor groaned beneath her but didn't hold her weight. Her eyes were shut, her mouth moving silently. The sigil she had drawn earlier now glowed faintly, as if lit from beneath by something terrible and alive. The brothers backed away. One dropped to his knees, crying, screaming her name, begging for forgiveness. Another fled up the stairs, but the moment he touched the railing, his arm bent backward with a sickening crack and he fell, wailing down each stair. Gloria's eyes opened at last, completely black, as though the universe had placed a void in her sockets. "Do you remember what you did to me?" she whispered, but her voice came from everywhere. The ceiling, the walls, the floor. "Do you remember what you did to them?" As she spoke, the candles blew out one by one. The temperature dropped again, frost creeping up the windows like veins. The house no longer felt like a house. It felt like a mouth, and it had begun to close. The third son, the one who had always seemed the least cruel, tried to speak, tried to explain. "We didn't know," he said, holding his arms up like a man facing a firing squad. "It was our mother, the agency. We didn't." Gloria turned her gaze to him and he stopped, choked, his voice cut off like someone had grabbed it in their fist. Blood began to leak from his ears. He stumbled backward, fell, convulsed. Gloria turned away. His body stopped moving a minute later. The mother screamed, rushing to her son, cradling him. "He was just a boy," she cried. Gloria stared down at her. "So was I, just a girl." The floor split open beneath the mother, not wide enough to swallow her, but wide enough to show her what waited below. She saw the faces of the dead, clawing, screaming, reaching up. The floor sealed shut again, leaving only the scorch mark. The mother fainted. Gloria walked past her, barefoot steps leaving no mark. Upstairs, the last three brothers were hiding, but Gloria already knew where they were. She knew where all her tormentors were. They had given her their pain. Now she would return it, with interest. The first was hiding in the attic. He held a crucifix and wept, whispering for Jesus to save him. Gloria pushed the trapdoor open without touching it. "He heard you," she said gently, "but I speak louder now." The air in the attic grew thick with flies. They buzzed into his mouth, his nose, his ears. He screamed, tried to claw them out, but they kept coming, crawling over his skin, under it, inside it. He died with his hands down his throat, trying to silence the hive. The next brother had locked himself in the bathroom. Gloria knocked once. The door dissolved into ash. He threw scalding water at her, but it turned to ice before it touched her skin. "I watched you," she said, "when you stood outside my door every night, laughing with your brothers. Do you laugh now?" The mirror behind him shattered, and from the shards emerged dozens of eyes, her eyes all staring at him. He clawed at them, begging, but the reflection didn't break. It swallowed him whole. Only silence remained. The last one jumped from the roof that night. His body landed on the sidewalk outside, twisted, his mouth open in a final, silent scream. Gloria watched from the window, unmoved. By dawn, only the mother remained. Gloria stood in the center of the living room, the house quiet now, completely still. The mother was curled in a ball, babbling incoherently, hair wild, eyes red. "Please," she whispered. "I'm sorry, I didn't know it would go this far." Gloria sat down in front of her, cross-legged, like a child before a story. "Do you want to know a secret?" she asked, voice soft. The mother nodded, lips trembling. "You never had control," Gloria whispered. "You never held power. You borrowed it, from fear, from silence. And now..." She leaned closer, her forehead touching the mother's. "That silence is over." The mother screamed, a long, howling wail. And when it ended, so did her breath. Her heart stopped. No wounds, no marks, just gone. Gloria stood, walked to the center of the house and closed her eyes. All around her, the spirits of the dead began to sing, not mournfully, but powerfully. It was a funeral dirge, yes, but also a victory song. The walls cracked, the roof bowed, and then, as the sun rose over Saudi Arabia, the house that had buried so many horrors collapsed into ash. The sun rose that morning over Safa, painting the sky in soft oranges and blues, a deceptive calm that gave no hint of the night's carnage. The neighbors emerged slowly, rubbing sleep from their eyes, startled by the sight of an entire house reduced to scorched rubble. No fire trucks had come, no alarms had sounded, there had been no smoke, just silence, and now only ash remained. Word spread fast. Police came, then military officials. But there were no signs of explosives, no traces of conventional fire. It was as though the building had simply decayed in an instant. The remains of the 7 sons and their parents were never found, not even bones, only their shadows lingered, charred outlines scorched into nearby walls like permanent screams. Gloria was gone. She left that place walking east, barefoot, her body glowing faintly under the morning sun, as if her soul now blazed with something brighter than light and heavier than death. The spirits followed her, silent guardians, bound to her by rage and redemption. But even as she moved on, her story had already begun to spread, because something else had awakened, something old, ancient, and hungry, and it was watching. Back in Accra, Ghana, a storm brewed, not of rain or thunder, but of whispers. Survivors of the trafficking network, girls who had returned broken and silent, began speaking again. Not to journalists, not to the police, but to each other. Dreams they shared, visions they saw, of a girl standing in fire, weeping black tears, her hands soaked in vengeance. Gloria's name passed from lip to lip like sacred scripture. Her face appeared in the dreams of strangers, her voice echoing in the minds of the wicked. And Thompson, still locked in a psychiatric unit under observation after his confession, screamed her name daily. "She's here!" he shrieked one night, banging his head against the padded wall. "She walks through mirrors, she knows my soul." Doctors sedated him, but he wouldn't sleep. He refused, because sleep brought Gloria, and she brought justice. Meanwhile, Ghanaian authorities began receiving strange anonymous messages, coordinates, names, bank accounts tied to the trafficking ring. Every tip led to a real bust. More girls rescued, more men arrested. But none of these messages could be traced. It was as if they were sent from nowhere, or perhaps from someone who no longer walked the world as we know it. Far from Ghana and Saudi Arabia, in hidden boardrooms across Dubai, Qatar, and Europe, the syndicate leaders met in panic. The supernatural wasn't supposed to be part of the game. Money, politics, police, they had prepared for all of that, but not for ghosts, not for a vengeful girl whose curse outlived her breath. The head of the Eastern Syndicate, a man named Malik Hamadi, ordered a cleansing ritual. "Bring in the black-robed priests," he said, sweating under the air conditioner. "I want every trace of her gone. Every girl who's seen her must be isolated." His eyes twitched. His phone vibrated. A message, untraceable, with one sentence, "I'm not done." Malik dropped the phone. A wind passed through the sealed room. Papers flew. Lights blinked. Someone began to bleed from their nose. No one had spoken. Then, one by one, all 9 men in the meeting room saw her, Gloria, standing at the far end of the glass wall. Just standing, no expression, no breath. Then she smiled, and the glass shattered inward. Malik survived, but his left hand never worked again. Every time he looked at it, he swore he could feel cold fingers still gripping his bones. Gloria had become more than a ghost. She was an entity now, a force, a reckoning. She was the voice of every girl stolen, every child abused, every woman silenced and sold. But her vengeance wasn't just about rage, it was about balance. And the balance was still off. In a small village in northern Ghana, a young girl named Efia woke up screaming. Her eyes rolled white, her hands scrawling words on the wall with charcoal. "The dead are rising," she kept saying. "The dead are hungry." Her parents thought it was possession, took her to a local priest. But the priest stepped back in shock when he heard the girl speak in a voice not her own. "You thought you buried me. You thought chains could silence me. You thought death was the end." The room trembled. Candles went out. And when Efia looked up again, her eyes were black. "She's not gone," she whispered. "She's everywhere." Across the country, young girls began dreaming of fire, of a house collapsing, of a woman who whispered their names in the dark, telling them not to be afraid anymore. And in those dreams, they smiled. Because Gloria had come for them, not to hurt, but to awaken. Meanwhile, in a government facility outside Riyadh, a secret task force reviewed the footage from the house collapse. A drone had captured part of the event, what little it could before its lens melted. The analysts paused the footage frame by frame. At timestamp 3:17:46, there it was, a figure in the rubble, standing tall amid the ash, arms stretched outward, not burned, not screaming, just glowing. "What are we looking at?" the lead investigator asked. No one had an answer. "This is witchcraft," one whispered. "No," the woman beside him said, staring closer. "This is justice." But even that word felt too small. Something was building, something old. Gloria had unleashed more than just vengeance. She had torn a hole in the veil between the living and the dead, and through it came not only pain, but power. The girls who had suffered now heard her in their sleep. The men who had sinned now saw her in their shadows. And the world, for the first time, began to realize the era of silence was over. Gloria's story was not a tragedy, it was a warning. And her justice had only just begun. A full moon hung over Accra, swollen and red, as if stained with the blood of centuries. The city hummed with unease, an invisible static in the air. Across televisions, phones, and radios, a strange phenomenon was reported globally. Girls, women, survivors, all speaking the same name in unison, Gloria. Some whispered it in dreams, some screamed it while awake, some wrote it over and over on mirrors, walls, and skin. Gloria's presence had grown beyond ghosts, beyond spirit. She had become myth, then force, and now something divine. Not the divine of light and mercy, but of balance. She stood between pain and peace, vengeance and justice, and she wasn't done. Her next step wasn't violence, it was revelation. That night, a woman appeared at Ghana's National Cathedral, barefoot, wrapped in white. Her eyes glowed like coals. Cameras caught her face. It was Gloria, or someone who wore her essence like a second skin. She walked straight to the altar, placed her hands on the stone, and whispered. The microphones failed, but everyone who watched in every language heard the same thing in their minds. The truth cannot be buried. The dead do not forget. The sky darkened, not with clouds, but with shadows. Across the world, men who had profited from trafficking began to drop. Some vanished from their homes. Some walked into police stations, wide-eyed, as if possessed, confessing everything in horrifying detail. One man in Dubai filmed himself screaming, "She's in my blood," before throwing himself from a rooftop. Survivors, girls long thought dead, were found wandering in deserts, forests, alleys, as if called back by a voice. Governments tried to cover it up. Religious leaders scrambled for explanations, but no one could control it. Our reckoning had come, and in the midst of it, Gloria stood alone on the coast of Ghana, the tide lapping at her feet. Her mother stood beside her, still mourning, but at peace. "Is it over?" her mother asked, tears in her eyes. Gloria turned, her face soft now, as if the weight had finally been lifted. "Almost," she said. "There is one more truth left to speak." And then she vanished, into the sea, into the stars, into memory itself. But her mother smiled, because she knew Gloria hadn't gone. She had become, 10 years later, a young Ghanaian woman named Abena, published a memoir titled The Girl Who Burned the Dark. It told Gloria's story in vivid detail, the abuse, the trafficking, the supernatural vengeance, and the awakening. The book was banned in 3 countries within weeks, but it spread like wildfire. Survivors passed it hand to hand. Girls in rural villages memorized its lines. Artists painted her face in murals. Protesters chanted her name. Gloria had become a symbol not just of revenge, but of rebirth. Her story awakened thousands of voices that had been silenced. Non-profits were formed. Laws were changed. The anti-human trafficking unit in Ghana was renamed the Gloria Foundation. In Saudi Arabia, whispers of her wrath still haunted those in power. They built no statues, held no vigils, but they never trafficked again, because they were afraid, not of God, not of government, but of a girl with broken chains and fire in her soul. But in the spiritual plane beyond death, something else stirred. Gloria stood at the threshold of the forgotten, the place where all lost souls gathered. Thousands of girls waited there, eyes wide, hands joined. Victims not just of trafficking, but of war, famine, silence. Gloria walked among them, her presence calming the storm. "It's time," she said, and with a wave of her hand, a golden crack split the darkness. One by one, the souls stepped through, ascending finally into peace. Gloria was the last to enter, but before she did, she looked back one final time to the world she had left behind. Her eyes narrowed, not in hatred, but in vigilance, because evil didn't sleep, and she would not forget. As she stepped into the light, the veil shimmered. Somewhere, a child born that night in Accra opened her eyes, and they glowed just for a moment like coals. They say Gloria is gone, that her story ended on a beach under moonlight, that her vengeance was sated. But the truth is, she never left. She lives in the flicker of street lamps, in the shadows cast by justice, in the fire that burns in the heart of every girl who says no more. When someone disappears into the underworld of trafficking now, when the wicked raise their hands thinking there will be no consequence, they hesitate. They feel the cold breath of something watching. They hear footsteps in dreams, and sometimes they see her, a girl in white walking through mirrors, through fire, through memory. They say her eyes weep blood. They say she smiles when they scream. They say her name is Gloria, and she's the ghost that justice calls when the world forgets.